Folks, this is the Best Movie Year podcast, 1987. My name's Dan Barrett. I'll be joined in just a moment by Simon Foster. Technically, he's already joined me. I just haven't really introduced him properly, but we'll get to that. Folks, calm down, relax. The podcast is just getting started. This is the sort of podcast that dreams are made of. That is a pun because the movie is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warrior. I'm very excited by this because I have next to no familiarity at all with the Freddy Krueger movies. My opinions on this, just useless. But someone who has a strong and storied history with this as a franchise is Simon Foster, my co-host. Simon, tell us, Nightmare on Elm Street, what is your, lurid history with this one?
Dan Barrett, hello everyone. This is a film that I have seen many, many times over. Initially at the Hoyt's Entertainment Centre, an establishment you'll be hearing a lot of over the course of the 100 episodes of this podcast. I spent a big chunk of my 80s at the George Street complex, and then I've watched it many times since on the VHS cassette. Having said that, it has been nigh on 3 decades since I last watched this film. And I might say that my opinion has wavered somewhat over the course of those 3 decades with regard to this film. So I'm keen to see what you have, because Freddy Krueger, have your thoughts on this film. Freddy Krueger for me was very much the Freddy Krueger of Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, the very first film, a truly terrifying film and a truly terrifying villain. It is in this third version where Freddy starts to go down the cute quips and the funny moments, and him being more of not a jovial, but let's say a presence that provides entertainment value as well as terror. So yes, I'm keen to see where we're going to come from with this one.
It's kind of interesting that you talk about it that way. When I think about Freddy Krueger, I think about him more as being a bit of a jokey villain, but this is because I don't really know the franchise that well. I've really known it more as a cultural entity rather than something that I've sat down and actively sort of engaged with. Like, my history with Freddy is really counter to most people's, which is that the very first thing I really had any sort of connection with was Freddy's Nightmares, which was this really terrible anthology show. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Parts of it, yeah. Some of the episodes, yes.
Yeah, all of it's terrible. Like, they're really low budget, just terribly produced TV programs. But it's basically like a Alfred Hitchcock Presents, only hosted by Freddy Krueger.
Wow.
And so Robert Englund's there in the makeup and doing the quips at the beginning and end of an episode, and then it goes into some sort of, crime, horror, drama again.
Did you watch it on Australian television, or did you watch the VHS releases of that? Because I know the video store shelves were kind of lined with the Freddy's Nightmares boxes for a while there.
I didn't know there was a VHS series of releases.
Oh, okay.
I watched it as God intended on Channel 7 at about 12 o'clock at night.
Oh my God.
I'm not regular.
Jail couldn't hold him.
This man cannot be allowed to walk free.
And killing him was the worst thing they could do.
I'll be back!
Now, for the first time, see how Freddy Krueger became an unliving legend.
This night never ends.
See how it all began and why the nightmares will never stop.
You're dead! Big deal!
On the next episode of Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Nightmares.
Saturday at 11 on TV 22.
So I saw that, but the first Nightmare on Elm Street film that I saw was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was Wes Craven looking at the, dud franchise that he'd created. I think he really likes that first film, obviously. And then as he stepped away from the franchise, I think it just got progressively worse.
A very meta film. Yeah. Or progressively different from his first film, that and he became less and less of an influential force in there. What we should do is check out the trailer for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.
I know who's trying to kill you. He wears a dirty brown hat. He's horribly burned. He has razors on his right hand. man of my dreams. He's real, isn't he? He's real. Let go of him, you bastard. Oh my God.
So, Simon, I have to say, coming at this as someone who had no real engagement with it, so I appreciate this is bringing back Heather Langenkamp.
Nice try.
Is that how you pronounce the name?
Yep,
And
Langenkamp, yep.
I thought you were going to say it's actually pronounced Hoyther. Either. Yeah, so I had no real connection with her. Like, I have seen the first film, but I don't really remember it sort of too clearly. It's just not that much of a presence in my life. So her coming back to this is a bit of a non-event. It's kind of nice seeing Robert Englund, but, he's always played Freddy. He wasn't in that reboot, was he?
The recent one with Jackie Earle Haley. The Elm Street fans will kill us for not knowing that. I think he might have had a quick cameo. I'm not entirely sure, but no, the last one he did was, I think, the Wes Craven's New Nightmare from memory.
Yeah, and then look, we've got some sort of fun cast additions here. Patricia Arquette obviously in the lead, and Lawrence Fishburne making a sort of
under the credit Larry Fishburne, which I think is hilarious. I'll tell you what we should do before we get too heavy.
I'm pretty sure, Simon, that you'll find that Larry Fishburne is his credit in Apocalypse Now as well.
You're exactly right. As a young 16-year-old, the film. Before we get into the cast too much, let's have a look at the plot very quickly. It was released. It qualifies as a 1987 film. It was released February 27, 1987. So that falls well within the boundaries of the podcast etiquette. The plot, very quickly. Having revisited the original Elm Street house in her dreams, young Kristen Parker, played by the aforementioned Patricia Arquette in her film debut, has her wrist slashed by dream-stalking monster Freddy Krueger, aforementioned Robert Englund. Her mother, mistaking the wounds for a suicide attempt, sends Kristen to a psych ward where she joins a group of similarly troubled teens who are having the same kind of horrific dreams featuring the burnt and bloody villain of the piece. One of the doctors there is Nancy Thompson, Heather Langenkamp, who has battled Freddy many years before in the original film, and Nancy senses a potential in Kristen to rid the world of Freddy once and for all. Well, we know that's not true, but that's what she's hoping will be the case. So there's the plot. And the Dream Warriors that we speak of in the plural are the group of kids in the psych ward, who we'll get to in a minute as well. So pretty basic plot, I would say, but it kind of works.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of what you want from one of these films, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. It's interesting. It was a big deal that Heather Langenkamp returned for this one. I don't recall off the top of my head whether she was in number 2. Number 2 has its own incredible backstory in that it is considered the gayest horror film of all time. It is held up in very high regard by our friends in the LGBTIQ community, about a young man coming to terms with his coming out. The director, Jack Shoulder, said that he didn't know he was making a really gay film, but it turns out that the film is regarded in that way. It's largely forgotten by the time you get to Dream Warriors. In this one, we're going straight back to the mythology of the first film and playing on all the elements that Wes Craven introduced in 1984, as well as the return of Heather Langenkamp, who I think, and it's fair to say, should never be confused with a real actor.
Look, I mean, yeah, sure. Look, I mean, she's not great. Look, I think the problem for her in this film is that she is up against Patricia Arquette, who is, as you said in her first film, like, she's really quite good. Like, immediately you understand how this woman, popped. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
she's got that magnetism that you just kind of expect from the outset, and she's incredibly watchable in this. Like, this film is only as good as, like, I actually kind of like the movie. It's only as good as it is because of her. Like, she really grounds us in a really, meaningful way, and is a real good audience cipher.
Yeah, she's good. She's a good scream queen. She's got a great set of lungs on her. She can scream up a storm. It's actually her very first credit, not just her film debut, but I looked at IMDb and there's nothing for her before Nightmare on Elm Street 3. So it's quite a sort of, her sister Rosanna had hits and been in a number of films by this stage, Desperately Seeking Susan and After Hours and the like. But to sort of land with a Hollywood lead role like this and make the debut that I agree with you on, she's really effective in, it's a big plus for the film. The male lead is a guy called Craig Wasson. Now, Hollywood kept trying to make him a star for some reason. He was in Brian De Palma's Body Double and a couple of other films, but his career went on, he settled more into sort of character and ensemble parts, and never really made much of a name. Are you familiar with the oeuvre of one Craig Wasson?
Absolutely not.
I do remember him. There was like 5 minutes where he was in things, and he was in a Jennifer Jason Leigh film called The Men's Club, and he, like I mentioned, he was in De Palma's Body Double opposite Melanie Griffith. But in every other respect, he seems like this. Did that really happen? Kind of actor where he was there for a minute and then not at all. So very strange.
Yeah, I'm currently on the IMDb, and yeah, there's nothing for this guy there.
The other one I want to mention, and it's a good young cast of psych ward patients. The one that was a big deal at the time for me and for a lot of young men of the period was Jennifer Rubin. This was also her debut film. She was a real B-movie scream queen for a while as well. She was in a terrific movie called Bad Dreams the year after this one. She followed up Elm Street, also in her film debut, as I mentioned, with Bad Dreams. And she was a really reliable cast add-on for most of the 80s and 90s. She did Permanent Record with Keanu Reeves and a couple of other films as well. But and has been a steady working actor ever since. But yeah, I was a big fan of her in this film and Bad Dreams specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so Simon, let's just quickly run through some of the nuts and bolts of this here. So, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, my deep research going to wikipedia.com, pretty much led me to understand that the second film, while financially successful, hence we see a third one, was fairly sort of critically derided.
Oh, well and truly, yeah.
Yeah, hence the need to bring Wes Craven back into the fold a little bit more. He couldn't direct this film, I think, because of some sort of scheduling issue, but he's on board as a credited co-writer, I believe.
He is.
Yeah, so we've got him. What did it do in terms of box office?
Well, box office-wise, it didn't do too badly at all. It was on a budget of just over $5 million. It took $44.5 million in 1987 dollars, which is 125 and a bit million in 2024 dollars. So that makes it the 20th highest grossing film of the year. So it's not too bad. In terms of that, it made the money and reignited the series, leading to a whole manner of sequels to come. So yeah, it did okay.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Look, we try to place things in some creative, some cultural context as well. So let's take a look at the top 10 songs that were on the charts on the week that this came out. So the kids, they were listening to "Living on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi.
Oh, of course they were.
Yeah,
of course they were.
Keep Your Hands to Yourself by the Georgia Satellites is racing up the charts to number 2.
Don't recall that at all.
Yeah, I'm sure if I played it, maybe, but yeah, no idea. Obviously, one of your favorite songs and mine, Will You Still Love Me by Chicago.
Yeah.
Number 3, Jacob's Ladder by Huey Lewis and the News.
Wow.
Okay. We're seeing a bit of a decline, though, for Samantha Fox with Touch Me, I Want Your Body.
Underappreciated.
And just a couple of other tracks on the charts as well. You Got It All by the Jets, Ballerina Girl by Lionel Richie, Open Your Heart by Madonna is still in there.
Wow.
Love You Down by Ready for the World, which I've
what?
On that one.
I don't think this was a high water mark for the music industry this particular week in 1987. I'm suggesting maybe the best of the year was yet to come.
Excuse me, Will You Still Love Me by Chicago was number 3 on the chart, Simon.
Oh, well, okay. That's the exception that proves the rule, I guess. So. All right, okay.
Look, I mean, I think the fact that we remember most of those songs is probably a sign of some staying power there, but
You know
that's
what?
neither here nor there.
You know what wasn't in the top 10 at this point? A little song called Dream Warriors by a band called Dokken. It is the song that plays over the end credit of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. They were an American heavy metal band formed in 1979. They split up in 89, although they did get together again 4 years later. And yes, if it sounds like I'm reading this, I absolutely am, because I've never heard of Dokken. But they have sold more than 10 million albums worldwide and were one of the first nominated groups in the inaugural Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance. So Dokken have their fans, and I am going to put up in our newsletter, when I send this out, a terrific photo of one Freddy Krueger with the Dokken band members, a publicity shot from this film. Now, let me just point out that Dokken were not the only big names involved with the production of Nightmare on Elm Street 3. One Frank Darabont, who would go on to write and direct The Shawshank Redemption. This was his first feature, and the director, a guy called Chuck Russell, they were writing buddies. Now, he and Chuck Russell worked together again the next year on The Blob, which is one of my favourite 80s horror films. And in a little bit of research that I've done, yes, I do a little bit of research occasionally, on July 7, 1999, The Hollywood Reporter broke, and they called it The Scoop back then, that Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont have struck a deal with Arnold Schwarzenegger to star as Clark Savage Jr., the Man of Bronze, Doc Savage, and it was announced in a big, flashy fanfare as being Arnold's next big action adventure, and it was a film that never got made. So, a missed opportunity there. Are you familiar with the Doc Savage cartoons?
Doc Savage, I do know, and this is one of these sort of famously trapped in development hell films. So for, 15, 20 years after that, like there were just all these efforts to make that movie happen, just never got off the ground.
Never happened. That's a shame. Yeah. Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont obviously went on to bigger and better things. And Chuck Russell famously not only The Blob, but also did Jim Carrey's The Mask, and he was a real master of the special effects and a really visual director. And I found this actually a very subdued kind of debut for him. Let's get into the meat of some of the key moments in this film. I loved the opening quote, "Sleep, those little slices of death," the Edgar Allan Poe quote. I thought that set the movie up kind of in a highfalutin way that the rest of the film never kind of reached, but it was a great entry point for the third of a Nightmare series.
Yeah, look, I can't say there was really a whole lot that sort of jumped out at me here. Like, if we're going to go by scene, like, it's probably really just the kills is really what we're looking for here, isn't it?
You're right. And when we get to my favourite moment from the film, it is one of those kills, that's for sure. There was a very tangible sense of the nightmarish about this. The film starts with that where Patricia Arquette is making the paper mache version of the Elm Street house. And then a little bit later in the film, we see the use of marionette puppets and stop motion film. So there's a real sort of sense of hands-on filmmaking with this, which I really appreciated. I thought that was... It's a well-crafted film, and a lot of that is Chuck Russell doing his special effects, mastery. So I thought that was a good side of this film.
So one of the things I was kind of working through while I was watching this is that I've got, I wouldn't say it's a disinterest, but certainly it's not one of my preferred genres, which is the, film set in a psychiatric institution.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's largely what we've got here, where you've got these kids who are all in hospital, who all have their own sort of, issues going on, and they all sort of come together. I couldn't really work out why it was that I am so cold against this as a genre, but I think it may stem from early childhood trauma of watching the film Return to Oz, which opens with Dorothy Gale in an institution and then sort of goes off into either her own sort of mental dreamscape or possibly back to Oz, who really knows for sure. Very dark, twisted movie. Anyone who grew up as a child of the 80s was probably equally scarred by this.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But when I was watching this, and I realized afterwards sort of the further context here, so this isn't really going to surprise a lot of people, okay? But when I was watching this, it just sort of struck me that we were kind of watching a version of the X-Men. Like, I was just watching, like, all these sort of kids with, like, their various sort of abilities.
That's a great point.
Well, I mean, it's not a great point though, because it's a really obvious sort of hackneyed point. Because in the last couple of years, there was that movie, The New Mutants, which was an X-Men spin-off film, which largely had this as the inspiration for it.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen that film, and only really sort of put two and two together after I was reading the Wikipedia for this. But while I was watching it, I was like, this is kind of like the X-Men. It's all these sort of teenagers, wayward teenagers who need, help. Suddenly, each coming together as a team with their various superpowers, which I thought was kind of cool.
The point you make is a really, really valid one. There's a very quick sort of throwaway line when the young guy, who's the first to die, he says, "We call it the snake pit." Now, that seemed like an odd reference to me because I remember the snake pit being an old black and white movie. And when I looked it up, it is a reference to a 1948 Olivia de Havilland film, which is all set in an insane asylum. So it's very much a Frank Darabont nod to his his movie knowledge and his love of old cinema. The Snake Pit is a reference to a film set in the insane asylum.
One of those classic moments where some sort of film nerd writing or directing a movie throws in a reference to something that you found beloved as a kid,
Yep.
but no actual kid from 1980s would know that reference.
Even pick up on it. Just another film nerd like me who recognised it there. For me, watching this did make me realise that in terms of what is acceptable in a film starring teenagers, means that 1987 was a long time ago. Now, this was a major studio release and played in the, prime maybe not the prime movie going thing of February, but to say that this is a teen horror film that uses drug addiction, suicide, mental health, rape as key to its plotting. And I just kept thinking to myself, even in the context of sort of a B horror movie, would you get away with that nowadays? Those sort of elements have become the realm of sort of underground filmmaking or have disappeared from storytelling in the modern era just because of the trigger warnings and the dangers about representing those films badly or unnecessarily or exploitatively. So, look, back in 87, it wasn't a big deal. Just put them in there.
I disagree with the idea that they wouldn't talk about these themes in a movie, but where I think that modern films are probably slightly different is that it wouldn't be all of those elements thrown into the movie. Instead, they would choose one of those elements, and that would become what the film gets hooked on. It's kind of the influence of identity politics in the sort of broader culture.
True. Yeah, absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It's hard to latch on to, 7 different identities when you got the one. Yeah.
This is also the film where Freddy's ability to morph and present himself in different form really takes hold. The Snake Freddy, the one that bursts through the floor and almost swallows Patricia Arquette, it is one of the series' classic moments. Also Puppet Freddy, which leads into my favourite.
I was watching Beetlejuice for a moment. But...
It was a little Beetlejuicy, wasn't it? But that... The animatronic work when the snake rears its head up and it sneers at Heather and Patricia, I thought was a terrific Freddy moment. We also should point out that an element of this plot is the Malaysian dream doll. No matter how deep I dived into the internet, I could only find a whole lot of people saying that it's total bullshit. There's no such thing as a Malaysian dream doll. There is a 2003 song, returning to the world of music for a moment, called Malaysian Dream Doll by Lazy Lane. And here's the clip. I thought I'd just say that so that you'd have to put it in there and spend all day looking for it. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, question without notice.
Simon?
Yes? Question without
Simon,
notice.
Sorry, in so many ways, you're my Malaysian Dream Doll.
That's very sweet of you. Question without notice. When a movie has a scene where characters are hypnotized, do you try and hypnotize yourself too? Do you watch the little swinging thing with the light on it? Do you stare at that and hope you'll be hypnotized?
Sorry, can I just ask you a question? Sorry, question without notice.
Yes.
How is this a question without notice? As though, more notice would allow me to prepare for this. Really, what approach do I really want to take to answering this question? No, Simon. No, I don't do that. That is the work of a foolish person.
That's what I do all the time. And on that point, what doesn't make sense is that the doctor, played by the aforementioned Craig Wasson, who's in charge of the class, is also thrown into the dream world. So didn't he hypnotize himself?
Look, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
let's move on to the really important part.
I feel this is not a movie that holds up to that much scrutiny, Simon.
You're absolutely right, it doesn't. But we should get to the classic line that is introduced in this film: the bastard son of 100 maniacs. The legend of Freddy Krueger is born when the ghostly nun, who we learn is in fact Amanda Krueger, is the woman who was horribly raped after being locked into the tower with the 100 criminally insane, and Freddy is labelled the bastard son of 100 maniacs, which is one of the great lines in modern horror history, I think.
Yeah. So is this a plot element that was already sort of established as part of Krueger lore, or was it introduced in this film?
It was introduced in this film. From memory, the first film really just sets up that he was a child molester that the parents of Elm Street took out vigilante justice upon. So that the element of where he came from was really only set up in this early set up in the third story here. Certainly wasn't touched on in number 2. Yeah, so it's just a little bit of reworking the lore and sort of giving it a bit more meat on the bone, giving it a bit more mythology, and I thought that was, I mean, it's a horrible notion, but that's what I mean. It's a horrible notion, being locked in a tower with criminally insane people who do horrible things to you. Why didn't anyone come looking for her? Surely her family must have missed her over Christmas. But anyway.
Oh, look, maybe. Look, I found the sort of plot element of that just just gruesomely horrible.
Yeah.
And like sort of introduced it as just like a bit of a, throwaway plot element. Just sort of seemed a bit strange.
Yeah. It was an odd sort of introduction that takes it to the next level, which maybe I guess was a strategy that they wanted to try and do to expand upon the mythology, but
Well, look, it struck me as the sort of plot element introduced where they're like, yeah, we're definitely going to expand upon this if we do a 4th movie,
Sure.
Or maybe they'd even had something in the draft which is going to really sort of build upon that. But the way that it sits in the film as it stands, it just kind of felt like it was nastiness for nastiness' sake. I don't know it necessarily added to the lore of Freddy unless they were actually going to really explore that properly.
Well,
And instead
that's...
it sort of seemed just gruesome to one of the women characters in this.
That's exactly right, and and that absolutely leads me to the very next point I was about to make, is that in this film, Freddy still has moments of real cruelty, of real indifference to suffering. Taryn's death, Jennifer Rubin's death, right at a point when America was still sort of dealing with the influx of drugs and the Just Say No campaign and all those sort of things. Taryn's death with the injection into her sort of weeping wounds and sucking wounds, where he injects her with the drink, and then he says, "What a rush," which I think was meant to be kind of a throwaway comedy line, but comes across as really cold and cruel. And then at the very end, when he opens up his shirt and says, "The souls of children give me strength," and all the faces of the children of the kids are on his chest, sort of sucking through his burnt wounds. I mean, that's some truly nightmarish stuff. And I thought when the film goes into that nightmare world and we are thrust into the Elm Street house and all the things that can happen in there when you're stuck in a nightmare, I thought this film still really worked well. Some parts date it, and that's of course we promised not to go down when we did this podcast of how things have aged, but it's unavoidable with some of the stuff in this. But some of the horror stuff still is really effective.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really feel that it was necessarily sort of grossly aged. Like, there's certainly elements to it where I don't think you see that in a modern film. But nothing really sort of felt too on the nose.
Oh, really? The Dungeons and Dragons character, the guy who's playing Dungeons and Dragons, that was bad. I thought that was dumb. Although the killer wheelchair was pretty cool.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is dumb, but also, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons have had a bit of a cultural renaissance sort of post Stranger Things. Like, it just kind of felt... It didn't feel sort of too far out of the thing. There was obviously a very sort of the moment kill in this one with the TV.
Oh, we should have got to talk about the TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch. Yeah, which is not a way to die that could ever be confused with a suicide attempt. Who's gonna hurl themselves into a television screen?
Oh, look, I've thought about it a number of times. But...
Yeah, well, yes, that's your life, really, isn't it? Hurling yourself into the world of television.
I saw that final episode of Lost and I was like, I just can't take this anymore. And off I went.
Now, of course, let's get to the question that we ask ourselves every week. Is there a pink sweater? Yes! Nancy wears a light pink sweater when she journeys into the Freddy's otherworldly lair. So, tick to the pink sweater box. I've been very impressed with the 80s pink sweaters up until now, and Dream Warrior 3 or Elm Street 3 lives up to its promise. Most memorable scene, Dan Barrett?
Well, it's the TV.
Are you going to go with the TV? That's your favourite death?
It is so memorable that there's no way I can really sort of get past that.
Yes, the kill that really did it for me was the death of Philip, when the tendons and the muscles are being used as the marionette strings, and everyone else thinks he's sleepwalking, but he's actually being pulled along by his muscles. And that image of Freddy looming large against the night sky and controlling him up on the rooftop there, I thought was very nightmarish. I thought that was very nightmarish as well.
I did think that was particularly cool. What I did find a little bit strange is that you've got the kid who can't speak, who's just trying to wake everyone up, and is like, "Oh, look what's happening out here." But like, at no point do any of the kids make an effort to get over to the other tower. Like, you don't know how long it's going to be till he jumps off. Like, at least 2 people give it a go.
Give it a run. Yeah, you'd think he'd give it a go. They didn't really like him anyway. I think he was one of the kids from Philip, the one who died with the tendons and the muscles. I think he was in Back to the Future, wasn't he? Greg Eastman.
Maybe I've got to do the research now.
Oh,
let's
find out. All right. Do we recommend people watch Nightmare on Elm Street 3?
Look, I mean, yes. Look,
It sounded like it hurt you to say that. Well, yes.
Well, no, it's just that we're talking about the third installment of a fairly well-known horror franchise.
Yeah.
I kind of think that if you're inclined to go and see Freddy, you've probably already seen Freddy at this point in your life.
Very true.
Is the question I'd probably ask is, if you haven't watched the Nightmare on Elm Street films, is the third one probably the one to give it a go with? And for me, that's actually not too unrealistic a question, because I'm just so unfamiliar with this as a franchise.
All right.
In terms of the nuts and bolts of it. Like, obviously I understand Freddy, but I'm mostly not from that TV series and the meta film, so it's hard to really say that I truly understand what a Freddy movie is. And I kind of had fun watching this one. Like, it was absolutely silly and nonsense, but, you know, I was fine with it. I went along with it. But would I recommend that other people check this out? Maybe. It's really time of night dependent.
Sure, that's a good way of putting it. I would say, look, it unavoidably holds a place in one of horror's great franchises, so in that regard, yes. But I wouldn't make it your entry point.
Can I ask this question? How does it stack up in terms of, like, how many were there? Were there 5 films and it became the New Nightmare? Is that
yes.
chronology right?
Yep.
Yeah. So of the 5 films, like, where does this sit in that?
In terms of quality, you mean? In terms of general opinion?
Look, let's not say quality. Let's say enjoyment factor, because I think that's 2 different things.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, that's a tough one to define. The first one is undeniably a classic. It's been accepted into the National Film Registry. It is.
Is the first one the best of them?
Yes, certainly the scariest. Certainly the most complex and well thought out. In fact, I would say that while this one does hold a place in one of horror's great franchises, you'd certainly have a look at it, but it does show its age, whereas Craven's original film does not show any age at all. It is a timeless film. It has that quality. I would put Rennie Harlan's number 4 next. I'd put New Nightmare at 3rd. I'd put this one at 4th. I'd put number 2 at 5. There you go, off the top of my head.
Well, isn't New Nightmare number 6? I feel you've missed
number
one
6. Have I missed one somewhere along the way? 3, 4, 5.
There
is. There's the 3D one, yeah, which I actually didn't mind. So I'd put that at number 5, and then number 2 at number 6. Oh, so many numbers. I don't want to do maths this time of the morning. What are we watching next week, Dan Barrett?
Look, great question. Next week. So, look, this was the challenge with launching the podcast, in that we didn't really do the math on it.
No.
So next film, we really, by all rights, should be talking about the other film to come out on the same day as Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warrior, which I always thought it was The Dream Warrior, but apparently it's just Dream Warrior. It's like Facebook. So the other films come out on this day was Some Kind of Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, but we're going to skip that, and we're going to come back to that in 2 weeks' time, because next week is the Christmas-themed movie Lethal Weapon.
Wow.
And it would be... to me, there's something just really off-putting about having a Christmas movie watched like too far after Christmas.
In the new year.
And it's,
Yep, good point.
yeah, it's like when you got a Christmas tree up by like the 29th of December, it just starts to feel a little bit stale.
Yeah.
Now, look, Lethal Weapon, it's not like entirely a Christmas movie, but it's at Christmas and it's got Christmas themes. So look, let's just drop it in the week of Christmas.
That's a good idea. That's good podcast producing. Well done.
Indeed. So I'm going to drop it a little bit earlier. So Lethal Weapon will come out on Tuesday next week, so a little bit before Christmas. In fact, Christmas Eve, if my calendar serves right.
How delightful.
So we are going to talk about Lethal Weapon, and Lethal Weapon, I think, of all the movies we've talked about so far, is probably easily, by a magnitude, the biggest film of any of the ones that we've talked about so far, and probably the best. I think it holds up pretty well. I think it's a very entertaining picture.
That strikes me as odd, because you were just saying off the air before we started recording how The Kindred is very quickly becoming your favourite film and your favourite podcast. So that's episode 2, everyone. If you want to go back and listen to that, that was some good podcasting for a really terrific film. I'm looking forward to talking about Lethal Weapon as well. It holds a very special place in my heart, and don't mind messing up the order. Hey, Some Kind of Wonderful has got a lot of cool connections for me as well, but I'm happy to bump that by 1 week to talk about Mel and Danny doing their shtick.
Much like most of the films I've talked about so far, I've never actually seen Some Kind of Wonderful. So, you know.
This podcast is turning into a Dan Barrett catching up on old films podcast.
You don't understand that's his high reason we're doing this podcast, right?
All right, my friend, the best movie in 1987, which, hey, we haven't answered the question. In the scheme of things, as to the notion that by watching 100 films, we're going to figure out if 1987 is the best movie ever, on what side of the ledger does A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors fall?
Well, look, as I said, I enjoyed it. Like, it's obviously just silly nonsense, but at the same time, like, it's fun, silly nonsense. Like, does this make it... Is this a great movie? No. Does it necessarily contribute to being the best movie year? I'm not sure. Like, in the totality of things, like, you know, fun like this, I think, absolutely deserves a place in there. Wow. I'm good for it.
All right. I'll second that notion for now, just so we can wrap things up and get on with our day. All the very best, Dan Barrett. Thanks, everyone, for listening.